Welcome to the next video, and today I'd like to cover another network basic concept, and that would be domain name system, DNS. Of course, sometimes some people use the DNS very loosely as domain name server as well, but in general it's domain name system. Once again, if you like the content, subscribe, click the notification button. It's helping us all. Before I actually move on to DNS, there is something that I need to cover. So let's dive straight into it, and that's called addressing. We've looked at computers being connected or interconnected with networks, but of course these computers need to talk to each other, transfer information, and for that they need addresses. But all their addresses are numbers 10.7.1.11, 10.7.1.2. But we as humans operate better with names. I've got a name, you've got a name, we've got a street name, we've got a name for a building, and we've got a name for cities and towns. So to bridge this gap, we use a domain name system or a domain name server, which is part of a domain name system. But before we dive into that, let's just look at a few things about addressing. And remember, we're aiming towards you being involved in the setup of your web server. Your service provider is going to confront you with these issues. What's your IP address, set up your DNS server, etc., etc. So let's look at addressing, but together with that I'd like to touch on a concept which of course is not going to come up when you work with domain name system or domain name servers. And that's called a net mask. But alright, I'm running ahead of myself here. Let's just consider a little bit of a diagram, which I always used to like to explain addresses and the concepts related to that. So we've got a street, and we've got house number 11, and we've got house number 12. All right. The fully qualified IP address for this house or server is 10.7.1.11, and this one is 10.7.1.12. Okay, so which of those numbers is the house number and which is the street name? For that, we use the concept of a net mask. So you write the fully qualified IP address, 10.7.1.11, and right underneath each of these digits, you write 255.255.255.0. This is the net mask. And thus, the non-zero part, if I may call it that, determines the street name, and wherever there's a 0, that's the street name, that's the house number, is the house number, wherever it corresponds to the 0 on the net mask. Alright, so the network address, that's another important concept. It's a network address, always ends in 0. In this case, it's 10.7.1. 10.7.1, because it corresponds to those entries. And of course, the house number is then 11. Alright, so, and once again, we're not going to use net mask concepts here, but I'm including that as well here because when we cover later on, when we cover topics coming up later, this will be important. Alright, so let me just make this a little bit smaller. Whoops. And we get our next diagram. Right, there we go. Full screen. So let's look at a practical example of a DNS. So there you've got your laptop, and you're typing gcorallabs.com into your browser address. Now, of course, the IP address for this, which you may or may not know, is 123.123.123.123. So you can actually type in that address, if you knew it, in there, and it'll also get to the server. So you type in the actual URL, and the DNS server sitting at your service provider says, this guy is looking for the IP address for that website, so it returns the IP address. And once your machine, before it actually looks in, I forgot something. Before it looks accesses the DNS, it first looks in a cache. Sorry, I missed that one. It first looks in a cache on your laptop or on your desktop, and then it does the DNS request. So let's just get that order right. All right, so once you've got the IP address, it goes to the web server, and of course, the web server responds with its content. Okay, so that in essence, that's the principle. But now that was only one DNS machine or server. What you actually have is an entire network of DNS servers. Okay, so there we still have our machine, the local DNS server at your service provider, and then of course you've got your root DNS, your TLD, and your authoritative DNS server. The authoritative DNS server is a server typically at the same service provider. It doesn't necessarily have to be, but in general it is. So right next to here you can see, it's not drawn in there, but the actual web server you want to visit. All right. So for each website, there's an authoritative DNS server. The authoritative DNS server for a particular website gives all the information, the registered owner, blah, 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 all those things. All right. So once again, we type in our URL. The machine looks on its cache. It says, I don't have it. It puts out a request to this DNS server, and the DNS server, if it has it, returns the IP address. If it doesn't, then there's a complicated interchange between all these DNS servers to obtain the IP address for the URL that it's typed in. Now, I'm not going to go through all the detail of that because that's just going to cloud the principle of it. I just want to cover the principle here. Principle. Excuse me, frog in my throat. Nonetheless, with all this interchange, the local DNS server obtains the IP address and it sends it through to your machine, and your machine can then browse the internet. All right. So, but just to show the hierarchy of this, I've got another nice picture here. There we go. There's the root DNS server. Then, of course, you've got your TLDs, .net, .com, .org, etc. They're all there. And, of course, the other servers form a hierarchy under those. All right. And this is why, there's a whole network of DNS servers. This is why your service provider often uses the word, it needs to propagate. So all these DNS servers needs to be updated with your IP address if you change it, or if you enter a new DNS record for a new website, IP address linked to that URL. All right. So, what type of entries? I must just maybe get a nice, just going to get another picture on here. So we can see the letters. If you update your DNS, there's an A record, there's a text record, there's a CNAME record, and an MX record. Now, of course, I'm not going to bring up the page of where you edit this, because the page will differ whether it's my service provider, yours, some other. It looks different. It's not going to be helpful at all. But what is helpful and what is general, doesn't matter which service provider you're at, is there's an A record, a text record, a CNAME record, and an MX record. An A record links the URL, gcoral, whatever that, what was our example.com, to an IP address. That's an A record. The text record is often a code that gets entered into your DNS records, typically with SSL certificates, authentication codes, that type of stuff. CNAME record links a name to another name, right? And then MX records is the mail records. But whenever you set up your website, the most important would be that A record. Okay. So that's just a bit of a brief introduction to domain name system. I hope you found that helpful. See you in the next video. Cheers.